A little bit about myself. My name is Dayna Friduss. I am a special education attorney here in the Atlanta metro area. In addition to being being employed in this world, I'm also a parent. I have a 17-year-old son who was diagnosed with autism when he was 2. So I come to this work very honestly and as somebody who has been the other person on the other side of the table, not understanding what was happening. So just to give you that, I come from this from that perspective as well. I'm trying to give you as much information as I can and make it as simple as possible for you to understand what's going on. So today I'm just going to talk to you about 504 plans, the basics of those, and a little bit more than that. Is my clicker not working? Yes, there it is. Apologize. All right, so these are the things I'm going to attempt to cover, and I'm going to go pretty quickly because there's a lot of information here, and I want to leave some time for questions at the end. But these are the things I'm going to cover: what a 504 plan is, who qualifies for it, how you should write an appropriate 504 plan, your rights under 504, dispute resolution, and then finally, best practices for communicating with your student, school, and the 504 team. All right, 504 is a federal civil rights law, and it's designed to stop discrimination against people with disabilities in programs and activities that receive federal funds. And part of those programs are public schools. 504 is all about equal access, okay? What the law is attempting to do is to level the playing field to allow a student who's suffering from a disability to actually be able to receive an education. So here it says 504 plans provide for services changes to a child's learning environment to level the playing ground for a child with a disability. There are 2 requirements for 504 plans. One is a diagnosis, and that generally is from a medical doctor or a psychologist for other conditions. But 504 plans, generally you'll see, it really is just a simple form that your doctor signs signifying that there is a disability and that they are recommending a 504 plan. And secondly, the disability has to interfere with the child's ability to learn in their classroom. And it can interfere with learning in very different ways. It can interfere with learning with reading, communicating, thinking, just being present in the classroom. Those are all different ways that it can affect and interfere with your education. Now, the disability has to substantially limit a major-like activity. This is a definition that is very close to what's used in the American with Disabilities Act when you are dealing with disabilities in the workplace. Basically, it's saying that this has to be not just a little thing, but something that majorly affects your ability to essentially live a life as a typical person. Now, this is something I think it's really important for you to know, not only for 504 plans, but for IEPs as well. Your child or student doesn't have to be failing in order to qualify for a plan, okay? You don't have to be getting D's and F's. If you were an A student, and because of your disability, maybe you're getting C's now, you're still being affected negatively by your disability, and you would still qualify. So if anyone ever tells you, well, they're not failing, they're doing okay in class, the next question is, well, with accommodations, could they not be doing better? That's at the heart of it. These are individual determinations. We're supposed to be looking at individuals, not as a whole. So it's very important to keep that in mind and not be dissuaded from looking at some sort of plan unless your kid is failing, because that doesn't have to be the case. All right, who writes a 504 plan? Well, believe it or not, you do. You, along with, usually there is a 504 team, or every school is required by law to actually have what we call a 504 coordinator. And the team usually consists of a parent or caregiver, the general education or special education teacher, the school's principal, and the school's 504 coordinator. Okay, so you were supposed to be working as a team to come up with a plan that best serves any particular student. Now, the other thing you should keep in mind too is that there's no standard 504 plan. It doesn't have to look any specific way. It is tailored to the individual. Something that I run into a lot is parents who tell me that, well, the school said they couldn't do that because they only provide these accommodations. They have their list and they pick from them and that's it. That's really not the way this is supposed to work. You're supposed to be open to and listening to see if what type of accommodations would be appropriate for this child. And just because the school hasn't done it before doesn't mean that they can't do it legally. So, yeah, and the other thing is 504 plans actually don't even have to be in writing by law, but by a large part they are. I've never seen a school district actually not put it in writing. They might not put much in writing, but they at least put something in writing. But legally, they actually don't even have to. But what you will find in them generally are the specific supports that they're going to provide the child, who's going to provide those supports, meaning whether the supports will be applied to one class or will they be applied to all classes. And then the person who's responsible for ensuring that that program or the plan is followed. Now, that is generally going to be the school's 504 coordinator, and that would be someone that I would encourage you to get to know well for your child's during their time at elementary, middle, and high school. Usually it's one or two people, and you want to get to know them really well because you want to build a relationship with them. Because I will tell you this, you can write a wonderful plan. I say it for IEPs as well. I can write a beautiful 504 plan with every accommodation that your child can possibly use. Same thing with an IEP, but it's only as good as the people implementing it. So that on the back end, you're going to need to build relationships, and that's going to be the best way to make sure that these plans get implemented correctly. Okay. Supports and services, there are generally two types, accommodations and modifications. And you've probably heard, if anybody has had any experience in the special education world, you hear the accommodations and modifications terms a lot. And they at times get used interchangeably, but really there are differences between the two. An accommodation will change how a student learns. A modification changes what the student learns or is expected to learn, okay? The best way to explain it is to give an example. For example, an accommodation is not penalizing a student for being late or tardy. Allowing a student to stand in class or walk back and forth, move around, allowing preferential seating, reduced assignments, tasks once the student demonstrates mastery, which includes homework. A modification, however, would change what it is you're learning. For example, a shorter reading assignment that doesn't cover the same material, a shortened school day, which may not include certain classes. Okay, that changes the expectation of what that child is expected to learn. So therefore, that's really a modification and not an accommodation. All right, how to write an appropriate plan? Well, the best way to do it is to approach it like a project that includes and that needs as much data as possible, okay? We have a saying in special education that if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So you have to write everything down, and you're going to be in a much better place if you show up at a 504 meeting with lots of information that you've collected, as well as information that you get from the team. Now, something that I do and that I encourage everyone to do when you go to these meetings, particularly when you finally have like the teacher right there, ask a ton of questions. How is this affecting him? What are you seeing? We call it the, Columbo strategy. Who, what, where, when, how, and explain that for me. One of my favorite sayings ever is, please paint me a picture. Okay? And then ask the teacher to really describe what's going on in the classroom, what happens before, what happens, during this event, what happened afterward. It helps to keep them as objective as possible. And a lot of times when teachers have the ability to explain, they get a little less defensive, perhaps, because they're given the opportunity to at least get you to see what it is they see or what they're dealing with. I always use this time, too, to sort of push back or get them to sort of look at some things that they may have labeled negatively, like, oh, well, she had such a bad attitude today. Really? What made you think she had a bad attitude? What did she specifically say? What did she specifically do? And so when you sort of break through those things, you get down to really what's going on in the classroom. But the more information you have, the better. So questions: what's Marcus doing at this time? How often? When? Listen to their answers, give them a chance to finish what they're saying, follow up with questions, and be nice as you can be. All right, the data I'm talking about, your own data, journal everything. Write it down. You can journal in your phone, you can journal in a 3-ring notebook, doesn't matter. Just write it down somewhere. Have it all in one place, make a copy of it, and let the team know ahead of time, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I see. This is meant to be a collaborative process, and you're always going to be better off trying to be as collaborative as possible, okay? So here are a couple of the things that you need to bring your own data about, particularly when you have younger kids too. How many times they fell asleep during homework, right? Because that's something you can actually observe. How many times they were confused about assignment because they were like, I can't remember, I think I was asleep in class. Those are things that you can write down. If you have older children, middle school, even high school, you can ask them to start doing some journaling themselves. Now, your mileage may vary on whether or not they do it, but it's a good habit for them to get in, it's a good thing for them to get in the habit of doing, particularly as they are going to be the one managing their disability as they get older. All right, so I take the data I have from parents, and I take the data we hear from the team, and then we sit down and we come up with things that we think would help. All right? You can do some research ahead of time. There's a list, there's a ton of internet resources, just like Google typical accommodations for narcolepsy. You'll see a whole list of lots of different things that you might not have thought about. Look at some of those and decide, or if those are things you think may be helpful to your child or your student, bring them to the team. Discuss how that would be implemented. Have it be as clear as possible, if they agree to it, exactly how it's going to be implemented, who's going to do it. But that's the way, the sausage is made. These are some examples of accommodations for narcolepsy: checking for comprehension, not keeping students in during break times. I talked earlier about allowing for movement. Get up, walk around, make sure you stay awake. Guided notes, which are notes that basically have you just fill in the blank versus taking complete notes. Sometimes I have notes that are provided to students after or during or before an exam because they might have missed something. So like a study guide or something like that. Some other accommodations, particularly for testing, that we schedule tests at a time that we know the student's going to be most awake, and that we just make arrangements to do that. Again, allowing for breaks, extra time. Some kids might need that. A place to and time to nap. You might have scheduled ones. We heard a little while ago how you might actually have some scheduled naps built into a schedule. That's appropriate. That's totally appropriate for a 504 plan. Class scheduling and priority registration, excused absences as well, and tardies. A few more: greater scheduling flexibility for classes and exams, alternative housing accommodations, and I'm talking about college because 504 plans actually follow you to college, and classes with final exams versus final papers. All right. I covered some of this before. Come prepared. Have your list of accommodations you think will work. Be ready to explain, particularly with a narcolepsy, which is like a hidden disability. You don't look at anyone and say, she's got narcolepsy. So you're going to spend a lot of your time educating, and you're going to do it every year. You're going to have to do it over and over and over again. Unfortunately, that's just the place we find ourselves in. Every time you get a new teacher, you have to start over. But you can do it, and you can put together something short. Nobody wants to read 10 pages on anything, but a one page, not only what narcolepsy is, but particularly how it affects your student. What it is that these teachers might see in their classes coming from your child. They actually really a lot of times appreciate that information because sometimes they're trying to figure out what's going on. And if they have that information ahead of time, it's like, oh, her mom said that this might, or this is what she might do, right? So that's another way of, again, trying to develop a rapport and a relationship with the teachers and administrators. I am a person who does not believe in hiding the ball, particularly in meetings that are supposed to be collaborative. So if I have a handout that I'm planning to give somebody, I give it to them before I get to the meeting, so they've had a chance to read it and review it. And if they have questions, they've had a chance to formulate those, and then we can it makes the meetings go a lot faster. Okay. There is some differences about 504 plans in elementary, middle, high school versus college and graduate school. And the biggest difference I will tell you is that the elementary, middle, and high school plans are more open to having accommodations and modifications. And when you get to college and graduate school, you're going to see more, or you'll see limited accommodations and not many modifications. Okay? And then there's also the issue of accommodations for standardized testing. Like you have a kid taking the PSAT, ACT, what's the other one? I should know this. My son just did this last year. I think I'm traumatized still. I'm dealing with it all. Yes, SAT, thank you. But so those tests are actually given by a corporation known as a college board. And in order to get accommodations for those, you have to apply. Okay, you just don't immediately get them because your student has a 504. You can get them, but you're going to have to apply to do it, and the best advice is always to do that early. Now, as far as I know, they're not going to need much more than what you've probably already provided the school. Obviously, they're going to want a copy of your child's 504 plan, maybe another letter from the doctor. I understand that these things have been tightened up a bit since Varsity Blues happened, and they have looked at this much, much more stringently. But it's still possible for that to happen and for your child to get those. But know that you're going to have to go out of your way to get those accommodations for the SAT, PSAT, all those exams. Now, graduate school, or college and graduate school. So your mileage is going to vary on how effective the reception to your 504 plan in colleges. My experience has been, while disability services at whatever respective college and university may be very nice, students will undoubtedly come across a professor who does not believe the law applies to them and does not have to follow it, and will not follow it, frankly. And in those cases, your student's probably better off finding another professor for that class. Now, unfortunately, there are some classes that are only taught by specific professors, and disability services might have to get involved, but just understand that when we get to college, particularly graduate school as well, that it gets tougher for people understanding and willing to do the things that, frankly, the law says that they're required to do. And the other thing that you're going to see less of, as like I said earlier, are modifications. They might give you some extra time, but you're going to have to take all the tests and turn in all the homework and write all the papers. Okay, there's not going to be like a reduction that you might see in a high school in a 504 plan, reduced homework, things like that. Colleges are very, very reluctant to change what they call the rigor of their class to accommodate disabilities. But be prepared for that as well. All right, what rights do you have under 504? Public elementary, free and appropriate education. How many people have heard of that? It's called FAPE. Not many. Yay! So the standard we use in special education is called free and appropriate education. That is what every child, every student is entitled to under the law. That's whether it's IDEA, which are IEPs, or 504s. You're still entitled to a free and appropriate education, okay? This is going over what I said about colleges not required to make adjustments or provide aids or services that will result in fundamental alterations of a recipient's program or impose an undue burden. That's them not wanting to make modifications. All right, so here are the rights. A school has to notify you about an evaluation or a significant placement or significant change in placement. First of all, there's no school that's going to be able to evaluate your child without a consent to evaluate. If you ever hear of your child was evaluated without one, then you should run screaming to the 504 coordinator, because essentially that should never happen. But say you have a child that you believe is entitled to a 504 plan, the school can and oftentimes will do their own evaluation. That's more so for like an ADHD something. And when I say they're doing evaluation, I'm not saying that they hire a doctor to come evaluate your child. What they'll do is talk to the teachers, do an observation, see if that impact to learning is there. That's what they're looking for, okay? They're supposed to notify you before they do that. That's one of the rights you have under the 504, and generally that doesn't tend to be much of an issue. And again, the notice doesn't have to be in writing, but most schools will go ahead and do that. How often are 504 plans reviewed? Well, that varies state by state, but generally it's every year, or it should be every year, I should say. And then a reevaluation, which is just, let's look at all the information and let's see if you still qualify. okay? That's supposed to be done, generally speaking, every 3 years. Here in Georgia, those are the standards, which again, are pretty standard in most states, is that we look at it and the team gets together at least once a year, and then every third year, we do a reevaluation, which a lot of times equals checking boxes that, yes, I still have the disability. Yes, it's still affecting them. Great, you're good for another 3 years. All right, here is something that one of the, I want to call prime benefits of a 504 plan is that it gives your student, your child, some protection for any discipline the school might want to impose. Now, it's limited in that what the school is trying to, or what has to be determined, is whether or not the behavior that your student is being disciplined for is a manifestation of their disability. Okay? So take, for example, you have a kid with ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder, and they get suspended for 2 weeks for screaming at their teacher and not listening and throwing things across the room. Sounds like that behavior might very well be related to that disability, right? So the law says if you want to suspend a kid or put them out of school for more than 10 days in a school year, and understand this is not just consecutive, but it's also cumulative. So you'll see 2 days here, 3 days here, 2 days here, 3 days here. If that adds up to more than 10 days, then they have to have what they call a manifestation determination review, which is essentially getting the 504 team back together to talk about the behavior, to talk about the disability, and decide whether or not it's a manifestation. If it is a manifestation, then the 504 plan probably isn't working, and you cannot discipline that kid the way you would a typical student. Actually, you can't discipline them at all. The law says we're supposed to get back together and come up with a new plan. Think about some other accommodations, do something else, essentially. So this is it's a protection that typical students don't have. That if something goes wrong before you can put a kid out of school, and I imagine with narcolepsy, it might be something like excessive tardies or excessive absences or, some sort of truancy or something, that they can't do it because it's a manifestation of the disability, okay? Now, there are some exceptions to this. If the offense is related to drugs, alcohol, or weapons, then it doesn't matter. And we live in a time where, unfortunately, kids have to be afraid for their lives when they go to school. So no matter what disability you have, if you show up with a gun, they can put you out and they can keep you out for at least 45 days. All right, the dispute resolution under 504, I'm gonna be honest, it's not great. You are entitled to what they call an impartial hearing by your school board or your school, and generally that means that the same people who decided it wasn't a manifestation or going to listen to whether or not the 504 was either correctly written, implemented correctly, all of those good things. I say that to say people don't win these hearings if and when they ever have them. Other options are asking for mediation. You generally do that through your state Department of Education. You can also file a complaint with the U.S. Office for Civil Rights, which we call OCR. That's the avenue some people take. I'll tell you, things don't get resolved quickly that way. And then the last option is to file a civil lawsuit, which is a federal lawsuit, which is very time-consuming and generally pretty expensive. All right, best practices. Again, document everything. If it's not documented, it did not happen. I tell people, there was a time I have a lot of parents who will email teachers, and the teachers will pick up the phone and call. Don't kid yourself. Administrators and teachers are taught to do that. They're taught not to document things, to put it in writing. So our way to around this is to, after you take that phone call, or after you get caught in carpool, because that's the other place it happens, is that when they see you, they just want to talk to you for a quick minute. You go back and you write your email and you summarize everything that was said, and you say, if I, misunderstood something, let me know. And you do that right away, and you're essentially creating a contemporaneous record. You can also record your 504 meetings, at least here in Georgia. We are a one-party state. However, again, I don't hide the ball, so I let them know ahead of time I'm going to be recording, and they just usually have someone to pull out the recorder on their end, and they do it as well. Okay, so your mileage is going to vary on whether or not your state law allows that. A place to look for that information is the Department of Education website, whatever your respective state is. Okay, good 504 plans, data-driven. Their focus is the meeting is your students' data, the data you have, the data the school has. At the beginning of the year, talk to the teachers, email them, get them, stop when you do the, I always schedule a separate meeting. They don't like to do those for 504 plans as much, but as much as you can, get in front of these teachers to let them know what your challenges are going to be beforehand, okay? Create a written profile about your student, that one-page copy of like, here's Sarah's challenges, here's some things that you might see. I encourage everyone to be as proactive as possible because you're going to eliminate a lot of problems that way. And again, most teachers are going to appreciate the heads up and the help ahead of time versus later. Okay, that's it for me. Does anyone have, I'm here locally. I'm happy to take any questions. We're going to do some questions now, but you can also email me or call me as well. Any questions?
Hello.
Hi.
So I've read somewhere that the narcolepsy is not considered a disability under the ADA. So what effect does that have on 504s? And
It doesn't. It's an
impairment or something.
It's diagnosed by a physician or a psychologist. Your physician, whenever they're submitting insurance, they're doing it under a certain code. So it's recognized by most insurance companies. As far as, and then same thing for mental, health things, those are DSM-5, but that's not an issue here. But yeah, I've never seen that as an issue. As long as it's documented by a physician,
yeah,
and you can show impairment, the fact that the ADA itself doesn't recognize it is not going to keep you from.
Do you have to provide some kind of, or should you not, or do you have to disclose narcolepsy on your college applications?
No, you don't.
And you can disclose it after you get accepted, and that's okay to get the accommodations?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it is. But I will caveat that with the accommodations you receive in college are going to be based heavily on the accommodations you received in high school. So what they don't want to see is somebody who had a diagnosed disability who never had a 504 plan now asking for accommodations for something that apparently in high school they didn't need accommodations for. Okay?
Hi, I'm currently homeschooling my son.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need the 504 to apply for accommodations for SAT? And can I get a 504 with the school system if he's not enrolled?
No, you cannot get one if he's not enrolled. Well, it depends on your state.
Okay.
Let me say that because there are some states that, for example, even if you're homeschooling, will allow your child to participate in extracurriculars. I don't know what state you're in. It might, if it's one of those, then they may allow 504 plans. However, in your situation, you're homeschooling, so everything is going to look different. I mean, they're not going to have a traditional transcript, those sort of things. What's probably going to be most important for you is documentation of the disability and how it affects them, and medical documentation from your physician.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. that it? Thank you all for having me, and it sounds like you had a wonderful couple days here. This has been a well-oiled machine. I was telling Keith, like, oh my God, everything has been great. So thanks for having me. Again, if anyone has any questions, my contact information, I believe, is in your list of presenters. And I'll be happy to just, say I was at the conference and I have this question. I'll be happy to help you, okay?